The Japanese Grand Prix marked a kind of turning point for Ferrari. For the first time, admissions were made that had long been denied, perhaps in a rather clumsy way. No offense intended, but Lewis Hamilton's earlier remarks about the SF25's ride height had seemed like corporate-style lies to cover up failings that were clear to everyone. At the Suzuka circuit, the British driver finally admitted that the car runs at heights that do not align with its design concept, a fatal issue for this ground effect generation, where just a few millimeters of elevation can lead to the loss of significant downforce, since the venturi tunnels that generate ground effect are no longer adequately sealed, severely limiting performance. Another key point from the Japanese weekend is that the two Ferrari SF-25 cars were run with different setups. Despite the long insistence coming directly from the drivers themselves that Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc had similar driving styles, the cars were configured differently. This is a typical situation when nothing seems to be working, and extreme measures are tried in the hope that something will finally click. A bit like what the 7-time Formula One world champion himself did in the Japanese Grand Prix, starting on hard tires and finishing on mediums, a strategy that didn't pay off and left the Britons stranded in no man's land. After the 53 laps of the Japanese Grand Prix, Charles Leclerc called for updates to give a technical jolt to a car that's not hard to label as disappointing. Lewis Hamilton echoed the same need to change something, so as not to fall too far behind competitors who are already pulling away. But the driver's wishes clashed with team principal Frederic Vasseur's pragmatism, as the Frenchman reverted to expressions many in Maranello had hoped were behind them. In short, the French executive stated that the Italian side's technicians and engineers must first fully understand the aerodynamic platform of the car before introducing updates. A new floor is expected to arrive this weekend in Bahrain. At least that was the talk in Ferrari circles and the Italian media in the last 2 days following the Suzuka race. But Frederic Vasseur's comments cast doubt on that, suggesting more time may be needed to truly identify where to intervene. Many also point fingers at the rear suspension, which allegedly fails to manage the extra load generated by this year's car compared to the 2024 Formula One model. That would be a major issue, as modifying that part of the car would require significant financial and technical resources, something Ferrari likely isn't willing to invest in the final year of the current regulations. It is more probable that the team under technical director Leclerc will focus on an updated floor, a new floor to avoid scraping the bottom of the barrel and sinking into an anonymous season, watching others win and celebrate while remaining passive spectators. Beyond Frederic Vasseur's cautious approach, the truth is that swift action is needed as those ahead won't wait. At some point, all teams, Ferrari included, will begin focusing on their 2026 Formula One cars. The first to do so will be the one that realizes there's little left to salvage from this season. The current campaign must be stabilized immediately, and that is why, regardless of recent statements, expectations are high that Ferrari will bring something new at the 5.412-kilometer Bahrain International Circuit in Scuderia. Especially since this venue is the ideal circuit to validate updates, cross-referencing them with data from the winter pre-season testing session. In short, Bahrain's layout makes it the perfect stage to introduce corrections. The Jeddah Corniche circuit, which closes the triple header, certainly does not. The Saudi Arabian track doesn't allow for proper aerodynamic testing, so if the new floor is not introduced in Scuderia, the earliest alternative would be Miami, which is another rather aerodynamically unfriendly circuit, or Imola, a venue Ferrari has often used to validate technical upgrades. Recently, the Ferrari engineers and technicians have seemed a bit lost, technically, and in their external messaging. It's time to tighten ranks and outline a clear strategic plan to determine whether the SF-25 can still have a say in this Formula One championship. Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc probably went in different directions setup-wise in order to collect data for analysis back at the Maranello factory after the Suzuka weekend. But this phase cannot go on indefinitely. The time has come to introduce fixes and at least try to get back on the podium. In the first 3 races, aside from a flash in the Chinese sprint race, Ferrari has been absent, a no-show after the winter promises. Setting aside Ferrari's upcoming technical overhaul, the Japanese Grand Prix also raised another question. Could the 2025 championship be decided by qualifying results? The fact that there were no overtakes among the leaders in Suzuka and that dirty air affected the duels brought this consideration back into focus in what is the final year of a regulatory cycle that promised more on-track excitement. This view was shared by Frederic Vasseur, who, after the Japanese leg, said that this season's titles could indeed be decided on Saturdays in qualifying, not just because it guarantees a good starting position, but also because the smaller the gaps between cars, the harder it is to overtake a rival. The Ferrari team principal stated after the Suzuka race that qualifying is always crucial. He explained that the closer the cars are to each other, the smaller the gap between them, and this is even more significant when in a group of cars. The French manager added that it's not just about fighting the driver ahead, but also about the overall positioning. He concluded by saying that the championship will likely be decided by qualifying. But will it really be like that? Realistically, there's no clear answer, but in many instances, qualifying results have had a significant impact on the race outcomes. Suzuka, with a single DRS zone, low tire degradation from the new asphalt, and a long sequence of high-speed corners, represented the extreme example of this, as often is the case in Monaco. In Monte Carlo, the narrow track makes overtakes nearly impossible, and when you add the fact that current cars are significantly larger, it creates the perfect storm that makes strategy the only real tool to influence what seems like a predetermined fate after Saturday's qualifying. In Japan, other elements played a role, but common themes were also seen across other races. Each track has its own performance delta required to overtake an opponent. At Suzuka, it's estimated at 7 to 8 tenths. That value finds its reflection in reality, as the many high-speed corners make it extremely difficult to closely follow another car, due to both loss of downforce and the risk of overheating the tires. The current generation of F1 cars was designed to make overtaking opportunities easier, thanks to a reduction in the turbulence created by the cars and a lesser susceptibility to downforce loss when following closely behind another car. Of course, though, the cars evolve over time, and the fact that the FIA has allowed teams to work freely in key areas, such as on the front wings and external parts of the floor, has increased the sensitivity of the cars to turbulence. When you add that each car now generates more downforce than a few seasons ago, it makes sense that staying in the slipstream has become much more difficult compared to 3 years ago. The fact that that section has been resurfaced has, however, considerably reduced the tire consumption, meaning a race that last year was played out with 2 pit stops has turned into a race with a single stop this season. Additionally, the harder tire compound could have continued much longer without showing significant signs of wear. This allowed drivers to push freely without triggering the only variable that could have changed the course of the Grand Prix. Looking at the first 3 races, it was tire degradation that enabled overtakes. In Australia, the first part of the race was relatively straightforward, with the only maneuvers coming when some drivers tried to push, while others were trying to manage the intermediates to avoid overheating them on a track that was drying in some areas. China followed the same pattern, with overtakes happening either early in the stint, when some drivers opted for a slower introduction to save the tires, or at the end when degradation signs were visible. This is the key element, tire consumption. There will be races, such as the next one in Bahrain, where the long straights and high tire degradation will offer drivers more chances to duel, especially towards the end of the stint or for an undercut. So, will the championship be decided by qualifying? Based on what we've seen so far, official qualifying has often placed the cars in order based on their overall performance except for Suzuka, and it's unlikely that we'll see a complete reversal in the race. But when the gaps are close, such as between teammates or the group of pursuers, qualifying begins to play a decisive role.